So I want to take this opportunity to say good morning and welcome or good afternoon to people back in Europe and welcome in today's roundtable discussion. We're going to talk about from Sweden to the US, unlocking business opportunity while navigating the risks. We are very pleased to have you here today. My name is Suzanne Svan, and I'm the president for SACC in San Diego. And we are hosting this event from the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce here in San Diego. And we are a nonprofit business network dedicated to supporting trade, investment, and professional exchange between Sweden and the United States. We connect Swedish and American companies, entrepreneurs, and professionals, and provide a platform for knowledge sharing, networking, and business growth in the US market. I hope you all can hear me. Otherwise, just as I said, put in the chat if you can hear. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone behind the scenes. Without you guys, it wouldn't have been possible, this event. So thank you very much for all your hard work making this event possible. And so this session is designed for Swedish companies that are exploring the US market and are already operating here, or want practical real world insights on how to grow successfully while managing legal, financial, and operational risk. And now we are a little bit ahead of time here, so I'm going to just wait a few minutes to see if everyone can start checking in. We have some more people coming in here, so I'm going to mute myself a little bit, and then we will continue in a couple of minutes. So I think we all are here, and once again, I want to welcome everybody stopping by. My name is Suzanne Svan, and I'm the president for the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce here in San Diego. And as we're waiting a little bit more, I want to welcome everybody for this webinar from Sweden to the US, unlocking business opportunities while navigating the risks. And I am pleased to welcome Annette Gustafson, Principal Attorney and founder of law offices, Annette Gustafson and Skybridge Resource Center, together with Marie Nordgren, Manager of Business Support Services and Law Offices at Annette Gustafson and Skybridge Resource Center. Together, they will speak about establishing and growing a U.S. business while managing legal and operational risks. And Annette and Marie, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with a question. Would you like for me to talk about my background?
I think so.
So there we go. So I started my company a long time ago. I've been doing this for pretty much, it's closing in on 40 years. And I've been the child of a transferee, so I've lived the life of the kid that came to the U.S. and didn't know any English more than yes and no. And then, of course, a long story short is U.S. has been, continues to be a big part of me and my life. And so I've started the company that I started. The first one was a law firm. The second was a business, more of a business based entity. And we also have our own PEO, professional employer organization. And then, of course, I have Marie here. We work very close with each other, and she pretty much does what I do. And the area that I practice in and my background has been, and our firm, obviously, it's in business law, corporate law, employment law, and immigration law. That's really what we work with, and we focus pretty much only on Sweden and the U.S. So you're not going to find that we have three other, nationals from different places. We really kind of know how the Swedish American business, should I say, activities, how it all works, and it feels good. So, like I said, the primary area of practice is business law, corporate law, employment law, and immigration law. We also have Skybridge Resource Center that helps and supports clients with non-legal areas. We have HR people, we have bookkeepers, we have accountants, we have virtual office services. I don't know if I can't list all of them, but that's essentially the areas that we work with. A biggie recently has been one that we call Morans, and it's a PEO organization. And so it's pretty much a leased employee service. The reason we started that is that a lot of our Swedish companies, when they set up in the US, they don't have enough people in order to qualify for signing up for all these important medical. So that has been really a good part. And also we are able to talk at a different level with clients. We understand the Swedes. We understand what they don't realize they need. So that's very much part of the Morans that as well. Am I missing anything?
Yeah, no, that was great. And yeah, as Annette mentioned, my name is Marie Nordgren. I am also a Swedish lawyer, but like Annette, I've had my one foot in the US and one foot in Sweden pretty much my entire life. So I was very happy when I was able to start working for Annette back in 2013. So it's been quite a few years now. Currently I'm serving as a manager of business support services. So I help our Swedish-based clients manage, develop, and provide, I provide business support services, corporate compliance, immigration-related assistance, and so on. And I travel frequently, well, both of us travel frequently back to Sweden to meet with clients and so on. And I'm also a board member at SACC Chicago and SACC USA. So that's a little bit short about the both of us. And then I guess we can move on a little bit here. As Suzanne mentioned earlier, we're going to be touching upon topics related to establishing and growing a U.S. Business while managing legal and operational risks. And we will have a deep dive session later on, but I think we can start off by sort of talking about some important aspects to consider. So now just going to throw out a few things, and Annette, you feel free to jump in as you want. I think one of the main things that's very important to consider when establishing a US-based business, cost and budget. Very important to know that things are usually more expensive than maybe anticipated, that things take time. It's usually longer time than one might first think. Legal structure is a very important question to think about. We're going to dive into this deeper later on, but the fact that things are changing all the time. Back in when you started your business in 1993.
Yeah, 93.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's over 30 years ago. A lot has changed.
Yes.
Since then.
Yes.
It's not as it was in the 90s in the immigration world, and in, the corporate and everything. Legal assistance, financial assistance, very important that you have a trusted partner and hiring the right people.
Yes.
So these are just, now I'm just like throwing some stuff out here, and we're going to dive into these topics a little bit deeper later on. But yeah, that's all for us now. And I know we have our colleague Vicki, so I'll leave it over to you.
Good morning. I'm Vicki Pavalainan, and I am a U.S. Accountant and CPA, and I've been working over 40 years. I don't even like to talk about that how much that is, but with with Annette for 21 years. So currently just working with Swedish-based companies, as they said, coming to the U.S., establishing here, and so seeing the whole establishment side. So we want to say in the beginning, so we've established a company, and now in doing that with the legal side, hopefully they have steered you towards what kind of entity, where to incorporate, where you will be doing business, and very, very important, where you will have a bank. You can't do anything here without having the bank account and the use of cash locally. So when my area is much more transactional based and sort of down in the nitty gritty, as opposed to maybe the legal side, which is more thought provoking, deciding the number one, I think, aspect of this is, can you afford a U.S. launch? So there are, as they said, legal fees and the costs of just forming the corporation, and then of corporate compliance. So Marie and Annette, I think maybe you want to jump back in here and maybe talk about, so once we've got the corporation formed, we need to make sure we keep compliant with the corporation. Yes. And so there are thoughts there. First of all, where will you do business? What states? Because even though we're called the United States, each state is different from all aspects, from incorporating and registering and income tax, sales tax, employees. There are differences in every state. And it's even as an accountant, CPA, trying to decipher the legal words used in determining whether there's state registrations needed are very complex. And that's why I'm always glad to have Marie and Annette to help with that determination. Some of these states won't even tell you what doing business means. Some states, it might mean that you have an employee, a salesman visiting a client there, or visiting a potential client for an hour, and that constitutes doing business. You must register, and that means tax cut. That has tax implications. It's cost. Here again, can you afford the launch? Thinking about where you're going to be will impact your cost. And then after that, so that is something that Marie and Annette would help you walk through, and that we need, even as the accountants here. Some of these states will tell you what's not doing business, and you have to decide, and then there's the compliance side of that, which I'll let them talk a little bit about, the reports that are needed and how that's a little different than Sweden.
Yeah, may I add something to that?
Sure.
This is going to sound kind of strange, but through all the years that I've been working with the Swedish companies coming to the U.S., there are a few parts that it's stunning to see how many Swedes miss obvious parts. And I love the U.S., I live here, but there are a lot of talkers who really can't do the walk. And that's something I want to warn everyone. Be sure I'm not saying you have to work with us, but whoever you choose to work with, you have to be careful and be aware of the talkers, as we often say. And also, so it's like work with the right people. That's really important. And then also, whatever you do, you have to accept that whatever the planning, you have to accept that it will take longer than you thought. And the next question is then, do you have a budget for that? Do you have that spare? So you have to be prepared for the unexpected. Otherwise, you may lose all of it.
And let me add to that. That is more than just the business. If you're moving here, you're talking about school, place to live, such as that. And you may say, oh, I'll start in May to begin the business and begin the immigration. And then you're not finished by the time school starts. And you're not allowed to be here in that capacity, which again, the Marie and Annette are more informed. I hear the impact of it because we're trying to start a financial part of the company. So
yeah. So those were really the important thing. They expect the time and cost to be different than you budget.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, something that we encounter. So, I mean, typically, our firm law offices is the first sort of stop for a lot of our clients when they might be established in Sweden, growing in Europe, and then the next step is, okay, we want to get started in the United States. And then they'll sort of come to us possibly and then ask sort of, okay, where do we start? Usually this with deciding on the legal structure, C Corp, LLC, S Corp, there are other structures. That's usually maybe the first question that we'll get. And that's not always even something that you need to, I mean, in some cases, you might not even need to start a subsidiary.
Right. And that's important to keep in mind when you want to establish in the US. Do you really need to have a company? Very often, you may need that, but very often it happens when there's a US person that the Swedish company want to hire in the US. That's you kind of get into a whole different lay of the land that you have to be careful with how you set it up. And this is, again, we say, be careful, beware of the talkers and the walkers. That's where they show up. You really have to understand. And if you think what they're telling you sounds a little strange, well, ask. Scratch on it a little bit more, and absolutely make sure you ask questions. And Swedes tend to not be that good with that, but you have to.
Mm-hmm. And as I was saying, we come in on the accounting side after that's all decided, but there are times where we get, maybe you've already had advice on that and decided on your entity, and maybe it needs to change a little bit. The tax implications are different than what you expected. If you get advice from US based people, many times they aren't aware of differing rules and requirements that we need for international companies. For example, there's a form on a tax return for an internationally owned company, and if it's done wrong, it's a $25,000 fine. And it's very simple. It's ownership information, but in most US based, especially the smaller ones, aren't aware of those international rules. So we really need to build a structure with help from a trusted person that keeps you compliant. And it's not, I would say, from knowing Sweden for 21 years, and I do travel there frequently. Also, I believe Sweden is more strict with the compliance rules. It's just a matter of knowing the US. If I moved to Sweden, I would need someone to help me figure everything out. Isn't it true that you have to have a license to have a television or some $15 fee, or I wouldn't know that from here. But the compliance, getting back to it, what kind of entity you have, you must stay compliant in the industry. We're trying to mitigate the risk here. So there's reports called annual reports. Normally, accountants can do them. They're simplified, but there's information that needs to be known. So a lot of times it's a good idea to have an attorney do those reports, even though they're simple, because you need to gather ownership information. You have it is an annual report per each state. Here is not a financial statement, as you might think in Sweden. It is corporate information. I think it's probably so the state can budget for what revenue they're going to have. Are you still here? Are you still doing business? Who are your officers, and what is your financial position? And it's a simple form, but we need to make sure that is done. And like I said, and even that in itself, where you incorporate depends. can determine how much your annual report fee can be. Some are $100 or a few $100s for the fee each year. Some are based on your capital or your equity, and which can be quite expensive. So even getting down to that minute detail in considering where you're going to do business in the first place is very important. So you need that trusted advisor for that. Then, okay, if we get down into, as we talked about, there are differences now than there have been. It's been changing over the 40 years that Annette's been doing, and then the 20 years that it has changed over the years. It's changing faster now. Tech is causing changes. For example, we need to have an officer here, an owner in some cases with a social security number. And that's something to consider. If you come, you've set up your company, you've done, and maybe you haven't gotten that advice, then it's time to get a bank account. You don't have a social. We need that. So maybe you need a person with a social to help you do that. And maybe you find that person. Oh, the next thing, you can't get a credit card because a company, the global credit here does not apply when applying for a credit card or even a business loan here. And to apply for a credit card in a company name, you need 2 years of experience, and so you need that sort of money. On tax returns, we need a signer with a social now, a social security number. We didn't used to need that. It used to be paper. So as tech has happened, it's caused a lot more. It's caused compliance from the government agencies to be able to happen. So that's an important aspect. And like I said, it's changing faster. This could change in a month from now. Something else could be a factor. These state forms. When we filed paper, we could leave something blank, and it would go through. Now, if we try that online, we can't even click continue. So there are a lot of changes. So beware if you've heard from someone even 5 years ago who have done this. Again, you may ask what has changed. But so from the accounting area, we really need to build a structure that works after you've formed your good incorporation and you have your bank that works. And I want to jump into the banking. It's a tricky area, and we have some of these online, I'll call them online banks popping up. And they're not governed by the same rules as a traditional bank. So they may not have the same financial stability. And while it may be easier for you to set up originally, there are solutions in traditional banking that experienced people here can figure out. But there's been online banks that have gone out of business and people have lost money. There's the same with online payroll companies. They're working and it seems good, and they have lots of nice bells and whistles and graphs and online presence, and then they're out of business and you've lost your money. And I know out in San Diego, you may be aware of the Silicon Valley collapse a few years ago, and that had to do with the balance sheet. It had to do with the investments of the bank. So I urge you to, again, find a trusted partner who has a relationship at different, again, JP Morgan Chase is a great option. And they have a big building in Stockholm, but they will not do business with very small new companies. So we need to find other options for that. And then even in a little bit of a deep dive into transactional, once you are doing business here, we still need, before you make a payment, any payment, a deposit on an office lease, you need to verify the bank information you get verbally with someone you know. So we have had so much hacking and so much fraud here. Billions of dollars have been lost every year because of banking information given in an email. So please pick up the phone when you get that information. Call the person who's sending. Ask them, where did they get it? Oh, this is from my employee. I trust him. But did you call him to make sure he sent this? And I can give you many examples of where that has not happened. And then money is lost, sent to some sort of fraud perpetrator, and then we can't get it back. And then we have a fight you might say, well, I have insurance for that. But the insurance gets, whose fault was it? Is it your fault? And it comes down to, did you make the call to verify the information? So we want to talk about mitigating risk even down to this level of paying your first bill. And then there's also, we would like to see you set up operations and processes to put these safeguards in place from the beginning. And again, I urge you, you might say, well, I'm so small, I don't need to do that yet. But as you grow, if you have hired US people and now you try to change, they will say to the others, well, we didn't used to have to. I don't know why we have to do that. We need to I'm saying, need to set these processes up from the beginning and think through all these areas. Another area is sales. So I'm sure that's going to be your first. You're going to set up your bank, you're going to set up your company, set up the bank, and then you're going to want some customers and some sales. And you're going to identify, are we going to sell from AB? Or are we going to sell from the US company? And a lot of times we hear that the Swedish company, it's maybe a large public entity and they have a lot of history. And so maybe the company here in the US doesn't want to, they still want to do business with the Swedish entity. And we've heard many times, this is a common mistake. If your product is subject to sales tax, which that's another whole issue, it's not the same as VAT. It's based on who is the end user of the product. So like I said, that's another topic that can go on for hours. But if your product is subject to sales tax and you're selling from the Swedish entity, you are still supposed to collect and remit the sales tax to whatever state it's applicable in. So again, knowing the state laws for even sales tax. I encourage that you must set up operational processes to identify your customers, how you're going to visit them, how are your orders going to be fulfilled, where's your warehouse, or so forth. Invoicing, collecting is an issue here. Many industries have their own time frame, and it's not followed just how you decide to put the terms on your invoice. Clothing industry here is something like 90 days payment terms, and that's just how the industry works. So again, going back to, can you afford this? Do you know in your own industry what type of payment terms you will get from your customers? And I hear people say, well, I'll factor them, because factoring is common in Sweden. That is almost non-existent here. And if they're going to factor, it's going to be on the good invoices only, and maybe for 30 days, and at a very high rate, maybe $400 per customer. So if you have one invoice per customer, you're going to pay, it's just almost non-existent. So you need to think about that. Purchasing, I've already touched a little bit. So when you're purchasing items, thinking about the payouts, the approvals, the banking, who will facilitate the payments, because we do not have the systems here as in Sweden that you may be aware of, where the accounting system can send the file to the bank. We're taking a baby step towards it here now, but as it is, we must log into the bank, create a recipient, and create a payment, and someone else should, in good practice, log in and approve it. It should not be the same person. So if you're seeing a pattern, you're needing more and more people here to do something right and be protected. It's not that there can be one US employee handle all of guard yourself against, well, I need a social, I'll just hire someone and then I'll use their social. And Annette has coined a term for years called the accidental president. And
there are many of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they are the person you've hired, you suddenly need something, and now you're going to use them, and now they become in charge of many, many aspects of your company when maybe you meant for them to be your salesperson. So thinking about these things up front. Annette, do you want to talk a little bit about the risks of the accidental president?
Well, I don't know if there's much more to say. I mean, it is a little bit, Swedes still, I feel, tend to be very gullible, and it's always attractive. It seems there's always a friend who said that, and a neighbor, and they've done this. And as you were saying in other areas, Vicki, you just have to, it's important to do your due diligence, question who you're working with, and the fact that they're great golfers, and you kind of on a social basis get along. That's very different from working on the business side. And if I can add one thing to this whole part, if you're going to send a Swede over to the U.S., it's typically there's someone or several people that come over. It's really important to understand how the backlogs have really changed over the years. And right now, if you're going to plan to kind of move to the U.S. and get work with a subsidiary in the U.S., number one, I mean, the L1s are almost impossible to get. A lot of people used to come in on these L1 intra-company visas. We're looking at it could be as much as half a year to a year, depending on the request for evidence that you always get or otherwise. I also want to mention the other, what I feel like is the best choice if you qualify for it. It's the EVSUS, E1 or E2. And I like them because it's one-stop shopping. Unlike all these other visas, when you have to go through the immigration service and where you submit your application and then you go into a black hole. You don't hear a darn thing. And it can really, you always get a request for evidence. So it's expensive and it takes a long time. If you qualify for other work visas, you may want to consider them. And my favorite, and all of our favorites, we always say is the EVSUS. So you don't need to, if you talk to other people, all this O and L and whatever, EVSUS is a one-stop shopping. Everything is processed at the U.S. Embassy in Stockholm. So it's just smoother. But sometimes it's not a Swedish national. We've had a number of people who pretty much lived all their life, in Sweden, but they're not a Swedish national. So then it's a very, they may speak fluent Swedish but you have to be a national to do the e-visas. But they're wonderful for those that are considering working and transferring to U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a little thought. This is sort of circling back to a little bit what Vicki was talking about and also tying into what you were talking about, Annette, but this with titles here in the U.S. When you set up a company, you have to have a president, secretary, treasurer as the officers. But then there are all these then chief C-level, I guess, positions, CEO, CFO, CMO, and et cetera, and that this is now going to be a bit of Swinglish. I'm going to throw in two Swedish words, behörighet och befogenhet.
Yeah.
Differentiating between those two. And I don't know if you want to go in and
go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But just what people are authorized when you put a person, we mentioned this with the accidental president, what are they authorized to do and what can one expect them, like what their title allows them to do? Are they allowed to sign agreements and contracts on behalf of the company? So that's also something that is very important to consider. And
well, and that ties into my discussion about the accidental president, because many times if you ask an employee who you may mean to have been your salesperson to use their social, well, then they want a little price or a little salary bump and another title, and maybe they want the title of president. And then we have had where people will, okay, but they don't have access to the bank, and they're not supposed, there shouldn't be signing contracts for the company. But now that title gives them some legal capability, some legal rights, actually. And so we've had some of the calling the bank itself saying, well, I'm the president and I should have authority for that. So you want to be careful with those titles. And Annette she mentioned that she said something about the Swedes being gullible. And I wouldn't say that because I'm not a Swede, but I can say about Americans, because I am, that there's a bit of an exaggeration, I feel. So when you are hiring, you need to be a bit careful to check out backgrounds and verify references and so forth, so that you know what have you actually done. This is, I liken this to you're handing your baby.
Yeah.
off to a daycare center. This is your company. You're opening in a foreign country, so what is best to keep care of it? And you can do that. You just need to take time to know all of the risks and getting that, then employing someone, assuming they're coming over here the company would employ them, right? You're talking about that, and not the immigration. They would be employed by the U.S. company.
Yeah.
And then that means you're going to have to give them benefits.
Yeah.
They need to have health benefits. This is not just provided. It's provided by the employer, and there needs to be a group in order to provide those benefits. So and the smaller the group, the more expensive that can be to you. So again, tying into, can you afford this? Looking down every chapter of where you're going to go and what it's going to cost you. We have seen in the past, someone will, be very lucky coming in the medical industry, finding someone here from AstraZeneca. Oh, we're going to, and then promising them, we're going to give you the same benefits you had. You cannot offer that as a small company. You will not qualify to offer those type of benefits. And you cannot pay the person. If the person has their own benefits, you cannot pay that for them. There's a fine, $150 a day per person to the government when they catch you, which they will likely. And you have to be careful in hiring. You cannot ask the questions. You cannot ask, do you need insurance? Does your wife have it? Do you have children? Those are all questions that you're not allowed to ask. So again, another area of risk that you could risk liability. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to that because it's kind of come up in a few times in the last few weeks. I also want to remind those people that may not be aware of the difference between personbevis in Sweden and your social security in the US. In Sweden, sometimes it's kind of funny when you're there because you're not a name. You just kind of rattle off your personbevis the whole time. Yeah, personnummer. Sorry. Yep. And but I think all the time it's important for Swedes, if they come to the US, understand the social security number does not work like that. It is horrendous. You can really it can be taken from you, and people can hack in. And so you really, you don't just list your social security number verbally nor on paper unless you really know what it is, and it's secure. And I bring it up because it was just the other day we had someone who wanted me to use as a U.S. person. They wanted me to use my social security number because they couldn't order something, and I'm like, are you kidding? Should I give you a little bit of a Google and see what it is? It's two different things. So that's very, very important to keep in mind, and especially for those of us who are used to the US, maybe meeting Swedes, that you got to teach them when they come over. Don't do that.
Yeah, that's part of when you are employed or hiring someone, all of that information needs to be secured. Do not share it. Do not share your personal information for being hired in an email. If someone asks you, ask them if they can have a secured way. There's liability for the company for that information. And here we have the rules. What's the European? Is it EDPR? GDPR. And so that's another thing. If you're a Swedish company coming here, there's a question of whether you need to be GDPR compliant with your information here. And what we've found is that if you are consolidating into a Swedish, you need to follow those rules as well, which means you need to keep your employees' information secure in a way that's a little bit different than in the US. So find someone who can handle that kind of security as well. And so are we at our time? I'm not sure.
Well, I think it might be some questions, Suzanne.
Yeah, no, you're doing great. It's so interesting. So I was just listening. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And yes, we are going to have an opportunity to answer the listeners' questions and get some answers for that. So please type that in Q&A. So we're going to have so this is very insightful, and just referring to myself being being also Swedish and lived in California for over 32 years, actually, even though we don't talk age, and how important it is, and really to consult with a professional, because you think you're going to save time or money or something and not do that. At the end of the day, it will hurt you. So
Well,
I strongly recommend, like exactly what you are saying, how important it is to.
can I just say to Suzanne, there's so
Yeah.
many Swedish organizations between SACC, Business Sweden. There are other Swedish
Sure.
based companies here, and I would suggest try to find that.
Yes,
Go through
exactly.
one of those organizations. We are aligned here, many of us, and so it's there's not just one or
No, exactly.
but
And that's what we love working. I mean, Sweden is the ninth strongest economy in the United States. We're putting money into.
Yeah.
So we are a very competitive market, and we are very tight knitted. And that's what Chamber and yourself, company like yourself, we can say members, but it's more than that, because we are working together and we're referring business and services amongst each other. So I really appreciate all that insight. And just a little, we're going to go over here to the roundtable discussion a little bit. I do want to also say, because it's dear to my heart about credits, that we're talking that Swedes a lot of times don't understand how you actually have to borrow money to build a credit history. And in Sweden, in a lot of countries in Europe, it's very common to not take loans or pay cash. And here it's almost quite the opposite many times, to build up credit. So that's also a very interesting topic, I think. And that's something, maybe another webinar we can talk more about.
Yes.
How we build credit in the United States. Anyhow, I'm just going to continue. We're going to go over to the round table. I think that's going to be a little bit interesting, kind of similar what we already talked about, but I have a couple of questions for you, and I'm sure amongst each other you can continue discussion. But Annette, I wanted to ask you, so what are the most important strategic decision companies need to get right early on this set? If you set right expectations, because it comes down to expectations. So can you kind of give a little bit insight? I mean, I know we already talked about it a little bit, but maybe more an outline.
Yeah, but you're talking now about setting up a company, because that's before.
Yes. So the companies need to get right.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I would just want to, quickly say before I go into that. I mean, question number one is, I think I mentioned before, is you should really think about, do you need a U.S. entity, or a subsidiary or an entity in the U.S. We used to say all the time, oh yeah, you have to sell in the U.S. You have to have a subsidiary. You go that way, and that's mainly true. But it's interesting to see more and more Americans are getting a little bit more used to the international part. So I feel like it's lightened up a little bit, but it's still that if you really are serious about the US, you really have to have a presence. You can't set everything up maybe up front, but I think it's very difficult to function unless you eventually have some type of entity, and with a little bit of a US person involved. But you have to be careful there too. There are all these talkers again, and so are they really a person that has the qualifications to comment? But other than that, I would say that compared to many other people from other countries, I really feel I kind of feel proud to be a Swede, because so many people are very knowledgeable, and I like that. But you have to be careful with again separating the talkers always. No.
Well, and right now, with something you were saying, get right early on, something that's a little bit new is our tariffs. And that can be handled differently if you have a U.S. entity as opposed to only a foreign entity.
Yeah.
So the impact of the increased customs or duties for incoming products can be different for that. So you need to consider that. That's as I said, things are changing. That's something that's new right now. So,
can you elaborate a little bit about the tariff? What the differences are? Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested in that because it is a little hot topic.
Well, there's such a wide range of differences that can happen. And I mean, right now we're seeing, if your products are being made in China, you're at a higher, you're needing to raise your prices, and maybe your competitor isn't in China. So we're having a lot of price problems right now. I would encourage you to add a surcharge, so to speak, as in times of when fuel was high, as opposed to raising your prices to something that's fixed. But what I'm saying, there's differences in if you're importing goods as a U.S. company, and it could be that you have your customers import them, and then they would be paying the tariffs. But it all has to do with, like I said, again, what kind of entity you are. And of course, there's the option of setting up manufacturing here or co-manufacturing as opposed to importing. And that I really think is an important thing for companies to think about now. There is co-manufacturing being set up where you could share instead of having to, buy your own warehouse or rent your own. You can share that space with others and maybe even have a smaller operation. So that's a consideration we didn't used to really get into talking about. And from my perspective, we're separate companies. We work so closely together. But Annette, we do get accounting clients or the business clients that come from other lawyers. And I find that one thing that's very important, whether it's the lawyer or someone else, to talk through all the options and then I just must say that Annette's very, very good at that. Which is, one of the reasons I like working with her. There's so many, I mean, here again, mitigating risks, but when you set up the legal company, there are forms we need. There are governmental forms. There's one called an EIN letter, which tells us what your IRS ID is. And if that's lost, it can't be replaced. It's very complicated to get. We have in Chicago, we have the electric company will not turn on electricity for a company without the original letter. And we lost it, or our lawyer didn't give it to us. There's also a PIN and some online codes that we need to pay online taxes, and we can't if we haven't gotten that from the attorney during the setup. It's a problem. So, and then I kind of went off on this. Sorry, that was supposed to be tariffs.
That's okay. No, it's okay. It goes hand in hand. And once again, how important it is to consult with professionals and people with experience. And also, I do think personally that it is a good connection to have someone that have lived in Sweden and knows kind of the mannerism a little bit, even though Swedes usually are excellent in English. It's always terminology and understanding how to run business here towards and to Sweden. I find that all the time, that it's a great advantage that we do have, having both sides on the Atlantic, on the big pond. Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about, Marie, maybe, or
I was just gonna comment to your point there, Suzanne, that me and Annette being two Swedes, we do a lot of translating, both literally, like certain terminology, etc., but also translating. The business world in Sweden differs, of course, a lot from the business world here in the United States. We've both lived in both countries, and we know. Because there are those sort of soft parts that we talk a lot about. There are cultural differences. And one point that I also want to make is that it's easy to maybe think of the United States as one country, but it really is 50 different states, 50 different legal systems. You have to sort of consider where you want to set up. All states are not the same. Of course, they have their different systems, and that takes a lot of research, I know, on our end, where to establish, where to qualify, where to. So to go back to your question about an important strategic decision to make early on, know your market and know where to set up, and know that it's different. It varies a lot in the different states. So that's sort of what I also want to comment on.
And I think we haven't said one thing. So to form the company, once you've decided what kind of entity, forming the company in a state is one thing. Then qualifying to do business in the other states is another issue. So where to actually form the company or incorporate if you're going to be a corporation is very important. And it's widely, well, you guys can talk about the states and that where it's best.
Yeah, and that's what the chambers and Business Sweden and those with teamwork with you, we make it a big benefit because we are looking at many states too. So
the only thing I would want to make sure people think of is that you do have to qualify. Let's say you've registered in Illinois or whatever, but then to depending on how you touch another state, you may have to qualify in it, but in another state. But I think that's people often miss that, and it can come back to bite you with fines and whatnot. So I want to make sure that people know that you separate from, you choose the state of kind of the law you want to govern. But after that, if you touch states in various ways, not just driving through it, but you really have to qualify as well. So you need to, if you're not very comfortable with it, you need to talk to whoever you work with in the US. It is important to let them know what you're doing, what steps you're taking, so that they can make sure you qualify where you should. But you should also not overqualify. Some people say, oh, we'll just do all of those 5 states. No, don't. It's going to start a whole, and unnecessary communications and whatnot. But you have to pay attention to the where you are incorporated, which is the base, and what the qualifications are in different states.
Great, very interesting. So let's go a little bit deeper. It feels like we are really touching a lot of different subjects, and of course later on we're going to post all your information so they can reach out and have a little bit more in-depth personal questions for you if that's the case. So, but I wanted to do a little bit deeper into the risk and compliance. That's a word we probably use that in Swedish, but I think that's a word that comes back over and over again. And also long-term growth, of course, because that's what we all want. Building a business is a reason why you've wanted to do that. But can you touch a little bit? So maybe Annette and Marie, one of you, from the legal perspective, what risk do companies usually discover too late? I know we touched a little bit about that, but maybe if you can continue a little bit deeper, to dig deeper. I know there's different states to do your due diligence to see what the laws and regulation are in the states, location where, and also maybe, the infrastructure within the state that will help your business. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. Did you have you can start.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start the ball going then. So risks. I guess one risk can be choosing the wrong corporate structure. If we've encountered through the years, maybe clients that have thought, okay, I'm just going to do it myself, and I'm just going to go through, I don't know, legal Zoom or whatever, and set something up. And then the cleanup afterwards can be costly and time consuming. So it's better to do it right early on. And then get, trusted legal assistance when you do set it up, so you don't start with the wrong corporate structure. Because again, as we've touched upon, US-based attorneys that don't work with international companies, they might say, oh, here's the best US legal structure that works for American companies, but it might not be what is appropriate for a subsidiary.
Yep.
And I know, and Annette, you can probably elaborate more on this, but one doesn't necessarily need to overcomplicate it. Sometimes keeping it simple is the way to success. So with agreements, with corporate documents, it doesn't have to be too lengthy or wordy. Sometimes it's better because the U.S. system in certain ways can be more forgiving in certain aspects, of course, depending.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I'll let you in, Annette.
Yeah, because I have one little thing here that tends to annoy me. No, many, but along with what Marie is saying, you have to be careful with what type of a company you incorporate. The C Corp is probably the most common, and it's the stock. It's a typical, stock type of setup. But the LLC, a lot of Americans and they push it on Swedes and LLC. It's great. It's a one-stop shopping, and you get to deduct on your private tax filings and all that. But keep in mind, if the owner of an LLC is foreign, you are going to be treated like a stock corporation, a C Corp. So what's the point? You don't get all the LLC that doesn't kind of you can be treated like a stock corporation, but you are an LLC. That doesn't make sense. And there are many good. So think about it before you decide which way to go. You really need to talk to people and hear the pros and cons of which one. For instance, sometimes you may have a C Corp and then you decide, well, we have all these different divisions. We want to kind of separate them, but yet, be able to consolidate. Well, then maybe it's good to have a to have some LLCs. You have a C Corp at top, and then you have LLCs that function as little groups that you want to separate for whatever reason. So be careful. I've heard so many people, Americans, who want to help the Swedes, and they tell, oh, you're doing LLCs. It drives me nuts, to be honest, because you just.
No, it's true. We also, LLC, for people that don't know, is a limited liability corporation. So that's exactly what it is. And
for those who like German, GmbH, it's the same.
Yeah, exactly. So
C Corp is kind of like Aktiebolag, the equivalent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as we've touched upon, maintaining corporate compliance, making sure that you file your reports timely, because even though it might seem like a simple task and you pay the fee, if you don't do it, you might fall out of good standing and worst case become involuntarily dissolved.
Yeah.
So these deadlines are important to keep track of, either if you do it yourself or you have someone help you. And then even, and this is probably something that Vicki can comment more on, tax returns. Filing tax returns is something that one must do, because if you don't and the years pass and you didn't think you had to do it, fees and penalties, and those can really accumulate. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's different date than the personal taxes too. So it's also, a lot of people don't know that. Yeah. So Vicki, do you want to collaborate and continue a little bit within that? And also, so like you said, with the financial and operational point of view.
Well, and one of them, you said discover too late. One thing I find is we'll have someone might come and form a company in Sweden and they're not active. For example, if they're medical and they need a FDA approval, from the federal government, then they're non-operational pretty much but if the tax return is not addressed because of this foreign owned form, it can be a $25,000 fine for not filing. And if you're a regular American company, it might be $100. So that's one thing they find out too late. That even though they're not operating here yet, once the company's formed, there are compliance rules. Once the company is operating, I think setting up the good processes and the good record keeping, audit ready, we like to say. One of the things we're not audited here. The company is not audited here as it is in Sweden every year. Normally for a small private company, it would be a tax audit, which would occur 3 years after the fact. So you need to have all of your records in order to pass the audit, and it's 3 years later. Maybe the people that worked there aren't even there. So keeping everything in good order to maintain your tax records, your employment records, your taxes, income tax, sales tax, and employer tax. So maintaining everything and a good way to be able to prove all of that at a much later time is really, really important. So that's where I say the good compliance. Just consider yourself audit ready. Think of an audit. What would you need to prove to them? And I would say too, for companies setting up here for the first time and thinking about coming here, and again, can you afford it? And it takes longer, and the visas are more complicated than they used to be. But where you're going, what is the reason you're choosing to go where you're going? If you're going to New York or you're going to California, is it because that's where it's best for the business? I would say, please do what's best for the business that you're in, as opposed to what seems comfortable for living. Because in New York, for example, the tax compliance is very complicated for personal as well. Much more so than, say, Dayton, Ohio, where you might not think is appealing, but it can be. So that's my comments on that. And just thinking about scaling and hiring the people that you're going to, because as you grow, hiring more people, are there the people that you need in that place you've chosen? We did a seminar a while back, and the embassy, I believe it was the embassy in Stockholm, that had regions of the US saying where there's concentrations. So if you're going to need engineers, it's better to be in this section of the country. If you're going to need IT people, they're more concentrated there due to the universities and so forth. So maybe check with that. Like I said, there's lots of resources for Swedish companies coming here. To just encourage you to look for them as opposed to just the US advisors. Because as you expand across the states, you increase your cost, you increase your benefits, and all of that. So lots to think about.
Do you feel that when companies do want to expand across the states, do you feel like it's a completely new process state, or is it a little bit easier in different states? So if you have a company in one state and want to expand to different states, what is your experience with?
Yeah, I can start. Once if you say if the company is already incorporated, that's kind of what governs what's a lot. But then the whole thing that you're talking about, that is what we said, qualification. You have to be careful, and with each state they decide what requires qualification. So I would not recommend you just qualify all the time. No, take a look at it. Do you have to? And if not, then don't do that. So so it's definitely a two-step. And I shouldn't say it's more than two-step, because you constantly have to keep in mind when things shift at the company, or whatever you do. If you start a company, you have to be aware of how that is going to impact the entity.
I think, Suzanne, it probably becomes easier as you are more experienced and know more what to expect. You know it's going to be complicated, maybe silly questions. And, we're trying to make payments to China now. And the Chinese bank is asking for a receiver's name and their birthday. So you're working for a company and you're the person going to record their cash, and now they need your birthday. I think you just get more accustomed to any silly rules that the different states could have. And so it doesn't actually become easier just because you're already here or already in 10 other states. That doesn't make it easier.
No. And that's why you have professionals to help you go through that.
Right.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to address? I have a few questions here from the audience that I would like addressed to you. Is there anything else within this topic that you want to add on before we go into the questions? Great. So we have one here. It says, I understand that at-will employment is coming in the US. So does that mean I can terminate an employee without providing a reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
That was easy.
Legally, yes, you can. Is it a good thing to do? Well, it depends on the relationship.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
may
of course.
just really want to get away from each other. I don't know. But yeah, you don't have to.
No, and usually common, it's a 2-week notice. That's what we always said. But by
It's
law,
not-
you don't have to give it to, you can
I'm not
terminate.
aware of any state that says that. And it's only
No.
something, oh, I'm giving you your 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have someone if it's on.
No, of course not.
Well, yeah, exactly. So
Depending on what kind of a position you have and the liability of doing so. And it's the same in both ways. You can also terminate your own and walk away literally the same day too.
But I think that's an area people should really consult with. If they're not used to it and haven't done it, I would really emphasize that it's important to talk to a legal advisor who knows, and especially these you have federal and you have different states. So you shouldn't try to do it yourself. And Swedes tend to want to, oh, I've read about this, and they think that that's research. No, it's not. Do you know what the source is? Who said that? What state was it? When did they put that out? So you really need to make sure you confer with the professionals that know what they're doing and are continuing to work right now.
And different states has different protected groups too, that you have to be aware what to say and how to say it and how. So, and that's very, Swedes are not in age discrimination, that we don't ask about age. And so it's a lot of protected groups that you need to per state by state.
Yeah, I have to say it is kind of, I laugh every time I'm in Sweden because you're identified, and I so often not by your name, but your personnummer.
Yeah. And even on the resume, the CV, they write the age on it, and you're like, oh, you feel like you're doing, And that's also one thing that people don't know, and it's a cultural thing that it's good to already, because it could be a very serious problem if they do find out. So that's also very interesting. And that's another webinar, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I have another question here, and it says, what about US companies looking to expand to Sweden? Can you speak to some of that challenge involved in that? Is that something you guys can?
I have not been involved in it, going that way. I just go the other way.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't.
We would need a trusted advisor for that.
Yeah.
In Sweden.
Yeah, so it would be, but you could refer someone to Sweden if necessary, if you have a company, because I do know by also a stock markets, if you want to be investors in companies in Sweden, it's always, but yeah, so that's a good one, and you can help with that if someone is looking for that connection.
You can do referrals.
Yes, wonderful. I have another one. So how does the U.S. leadership distinguish itself from Swedish leadership? A little bit.
One is consensus, and the other, I'm the leader. Do what I tell you to do. But then you have people. I mean, people are different. Some, excuse my French, but some can be idiots. How they act. But essentially, that's it's
I think the leadership too. It's very much different here because of this at will, because you can just be fired. So as a leader, you have to, in the U.S., not intimidate in that way, and because you will hamper their employees' ability to do their job. We talked about people being in an advertising agency here, and they're afraid. They're afraid to bring up their ideas. They could be fired. And in Sweden, right, it's much more, you don't worry about that, as I'm told, as much.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. It's harder to fire people, get rid of people in Sweden for sure. So there it's maybe more equal, for lack of a better word, whereas here we have more of the hierarchy in most organizations.
Good. I think we have time for another question here. So here, are we required to qualify to do business in a state where we have an employee, and where are the legal or operational implication of doing so?
Depends on the state. You have to always look at the state, and what may have been, a year ago may not be the same. So, I mean, for me, I always look fresh. But yeah, in most, if it's hard to say, but if you Yeah, if you kind of your employment is in a state, absolutely, you may have to qualify, but you really have to talk to an advisor, and I would say don't over qualify because it's really a pain to remove prior ones. So be careful with check in advance if you really need to qualify. If you don't.
Now, we've had some experience with, and the states themselves don't know. So we registered as an employer, and we were told that was enough, or we believed that was enough, but that state had changed and we needed to also qualify as a business. But the two departments didn't know that. And it took a little while to figure that out. And there is tax implications. Sometimes just having an employee can cause different tax situations. For example, we had a situation where an employee was in Tennessee writing software for a customer in New York. That sale was taxed in both places because Tennessee taxes where the services are initiated, and New York taxes what is sold into there. So that sale was taxed in two states because of an employee, and you don't want to think that you hire an employee based on where they live, but maybe you do. I mean, if that were going to double your taxation, this company, for example, had $6 million in sales and ended up, if you added all their taxation across states, they paid tax on $9 million.
Ooh.
That's
a good point now, especially when people work more virtually or from home.
Right.
If you hire across states, that you know those what implication that would be. That's very interesting. Actually, I got one up here. How does U.S. It is kind of what we kind of talked about, I think. But how does U.S. hiring distinguish itself from the Swedish hiring process, not the firing?
Yeah, but in the US that it kind of goes hand in hand, the hire and fire.
Yeah. So do you think it's pretty similar, the hiring? I can chime in a little bit by personal experience and hearing if people coming into the country. It's a negotiation when it comes to benefits. It's very, very different than Sweden. And I don't know if you have an input that with 401ks and health insurance, and because sometimes they use that in as a negotiation and not necessarily the salary in itself, but then they go in and so do you have any reflection or comments about that?
No, Vicki, if you have the same, but I feel like that's not very common with the details that you describe. I find, Vicki, do you have any?
Well, I do see, especially as the company grows, depending on how the type of people they're hiring, I think the difference is in Sweden, you all have benefits, right? No matter what. And in the US, you mainly have them through your employer. It could be, you can choose. It could be through your spouse as well. But it can be, I have seen a few instances of the salary being comparable, but another company's offering better benefits. Exactly. So especially as you mentioned, the 401k, which as you know is sort of the retirement / pension savings fund, and what the company is offering for that. Some companies will contribute to your savings for your retirement where others won't, and that can be a big factor.
Yeah, very big. Yeah. Great. So I think we're doing really well here. And like I said, we're still open for some Q&As if anyone in the audience would like to ask some questions. But as we kind of closing up here a little bit, I could talk about this forever. I think it's very interesting. And I'm sure we will do a follow-up webinar and also your information. We're going to send out the video. We are recording this to people that do participate and for other people that couldn't make it, and also your contact information so they can reach out to you personally. But I would like to ask a kind of a single most important, like a reflection, if you should say. So if you could say by your experience and in a kind of in a sentence or two, So what is the single most piece of advice you would give a Swedish company entering the US today? So why don't we start with you, Vicki? And
Yeah.
I think it gives you time to think.
There's so many areas, and I could go on, and like you say, I could talk about this all day, and I have. I really think the single most important thing is having someone you trust with a social that you can use. It's impactful in most areas, the banking, the taxes, the credit, and so you really need to consider probably someone within the company doing what it takes to have someone within the company I'm talking about in Sweden, the founding company, as opposed to trying to hire somebody here with that. So I feel like that's the upfront most important thing to consider.
Yeah.
I go to Marie.
Yeah, it's hard to single it down to the most important piece of advice, but I would probably.
I know you're attorney, so we're not. What is one of the most important?
Yeah, I would probably say don't. First of all, well, plan ahead and don't do it yourself. Have a trusted partner.
Yeah. I would agree with Marie with that part. And I told you before that beware of the the US person who means well to tell you what to do. You need to see an attorney. It doesn't have to be us. You need to at least touch base with someone who really is qualified to comment on the questions you have.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's a good term to end this session, unless there's something else you guys want to add on to.
Again, we could
talk covered a lot. Yeah, we could talk forever, and that's also, and I do want to do a shout out because I do think they should consolidate with you, or at least set up a meeting. And as with Swedes and Americans, it's all about relationships. So I would really think that would be a great opportunity for everyone listening in to at least set up an appointment with you guys and see what you can do in order to help. And of course, here as a chamber, we are also available if there is anything we can do in order to help. And everyone is welcome to San Diego. So if you do come here, let us know, and we would love to chat and have a fika.
Yes.
Yeah. So great. Yeah, I think we're going to wrap this up, and thank you very much for today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we're going to go offline here now soon.
Very good.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay. No.